super excited that people are here. I wasn't sure. I thought, okay, it's like December 28th. So many people are out on holidays. Maybe I should cancel it. But I thought, let's do it. Some people will join. We're recording it, so you'll get the recording of this, even if you're not able to join. Hey, Rana. And here, as a reminder, we have put in the chat, and there's a link to the Slido where you can ask questions and vote on the question there. I migrated a few questions we didn't get to last time, which I thought were worth covering. But if you have something, put it there, or if you want to vote and make something go up the list. And you can also just unmute yourself, ask the question, and have a discussion. Also, doesn't have to be a question. If you have something cool to share or anything you'd like to talk about, that's very welcome. Anyway, guys, let's get started. I honestly don't know if more people are joining given the time. So if they do, they'll catch up. And as I said, there is a recording. The way we'll do it, like last time, is we'll work through questions from the Slido in order. If there are still things coming out, please just engage and let's discuss. When we run out of questions, I'll take some time to demo something really cool I discovered recently, which I think might be interesting to you. And then we'll see if we can have a bit of a discussion or just close for the week. And as a reminder, I'll be doing these sessions every other Sunday, also in 2026. The last one was really fun. I'm sure today will be too, so really looking forward to it. And yeah, so feel free to drop in anytime. Okay, so let's start with the questions from the Slido. The first one is, I would like to test the capabilities of code, but I'm not comfortable working in the terminal. So what's the best way to proceed? I love this question. And in fact, it inspired me to even write a blog post, which I published a few days ago, and I'll share with you here. But I'll also address it directly. So yeah, this is a really good question. Code started as a terminal-based tool, partly, I guess, because it was aimed at developers initially, maybe because it was easy to develop, or maybe because the team that developed it in Anthropic thought it's kind of cool, maybe a bit quirky. It's a bit weird to work in the terminal, right? So even experienced engineers like me, who spend a lot of time in the terminal every day, that's not necessarily where I expect to run very complex applications. I usually use it for some commands or things like this. But unfortunately, Claude Code started a trend, and now everyone is all about CLI, command line interface, or terminal UI, GUI. That doesn't mean that you have to use code from the terminal. There are actually other great ways. I don't use it exclusively from the terminal. I use it sometimes from the terminal when I'm already in the terminal and there's something to do there. But more commonly, I use the Visual Studio extension. So there's an extension for Visual Studio Code. If you have Claude Code, you can just install it and it will connect to Code locally. So you do need to install Claude Code, but you don't have to use it then on the terminal. The extension is great, and I have to say, I think it's in many ways much more convenient and more elegant than using it in the terminal. The display is really nice, and all that's just what you see. It works. Has a very nice display. It supports. Oh, I'm not presenting, right? So I'm sorry about that. Okay, so now I'm presenting to you there my Visual Studio Code with the Claude Code extension here, living side by side with some other things I'm using like Copilot, Chat, and Codex and other things. It is really convenient. It looks very nice. It supports all the different features like adding files. It's also aware of things that I have open in Visual Studio. And I can from here manage all the plugins and MCP servers and all the different /commands and skills and whatnot. So for me, this is where I do most of my code coding. And I think it's a really great option. Visual Studio Code itself is free and open source. You can just download it, and with time, you'll kind of figure out exactly how you want to configure it. It's like infinitely configurable with themes and extensions and whatnot. But you can just go and find in the extension tab the code extension and install it. And if you have Claude Code installed, it will work with it. Some other options are the Claude desktop apps. Claude, they have like this desktop application. I'll move it here. And in the application, there is a code tab. And when you're in the code tab, you can just select a folder. So let's okay, can do my playground, which I keep for these things. And again, then now this is Claude Code. It's not Claude, the chatbot. It is working locally with Claude Code on my machine, just with a nicer interface instead of using the terminal UI. So these are two options for using specifically Claude Code without having to spend time in the terminal, and which can be confusing and a bit intimidating. Now, Claude Code is not the only agent, so I noticed kind of it's the Google, it's the Frigidaire, it's this one brand that kind of defined this this particular kind of product, but there are other agents and they're just as good. So, for example, Codex is the one from OpenAI. If you have a ChatGPT subscription, even if it's the minimal one with what's it called, Plus, you already have some allowance. I don't know how much it is, and I don't actually use it that much these days, but it's here. Again, if you have Visual Studio Code, you can just install the extension and you have a nice interface to it, which provides all the same features that are provided by the command line Codex. Likewise, GitHub Copilot Chat, this one I use really quite a lot. What I like about it is that it has access to many different kinds of models. So they have access to the Anthropic models and to all the different OpenAI models, then Gemini and even Grok and some other things. So it's nice if you want to experiment with different providers. And again, there's a really nice extension that works within Visual Studio Code. There is also a CLI if you really want, but you don't have to use this. One final option I'll show you is Open Code, which I am very fond of. Open Code, I think I'll reach here and open my playground. Open Code is an open source agent that's really quite featured. Again, it has access to all the different subscriptions and providers. You can use it with your cloud subscription or with your Copilot or their own subscription. Well, it's not quite subscription, but like a per use with the huge variety of models. And again, it started with the command line terminal interface, but they now also have this really nice desktop application, which I think in terms of kind of look and feel, they're probably the best. And again, the advantage is you can choose from many different models from different providers. So all are great options. You really don't have to use the terminal for working with Claude Code. I don't use it that much actually. I use much more Visual Studio Code for this. You get exactly the same functionality and it's a much more inviting way, I guess, to work with Claude Code. It's also nice to be in your IDE in the editor and be able to open files, see what changes it's making. It's more intuitive. So I hope this answers the question. Is there any follow-ups or some experiences you've had working with different tools like this? Would love to hear. All right, if not, let's go to the next question. For someone who doesn't have an AI or machine learning background, what would you recommend for starting out in this field? Specifically, building AI agents for automating tasks. That's a brilliant question. Really, I'm not sure if anyone whoever raised it is here today again, but I'm grateful for it. First of all, I think that AI and machine learning, we used to always kind of say it together in the past because you really needed deep knowledge in machine learning to do anything with AI. That's no longer the case. And so, sure, there are some people who become machine learning researchers or engineers, and that's a fascinating field. I spent a great deal of time learning and getting good at this, and it has definitely prepared me and enriched me for working in AI. But you can also do a lot in AI without focusing on the machine learning aspect, understanding maybe enough of just to have a basic background, and instead focusing on what is kind of being called now AI engineering or just sort of agentic AI. What I would recommend now, today, to someone coming into this and wanting to build agents and agentic systems is not to jump straight into sort of the basics of machine learning, because there's a lot and that can be maybe a bit demotivating or if nothing else, quite time consuming to learn about these things. But to start working with AI capabilities, I think the easiest way to get into it, or let's say a good balance of easy and powerful and effective, is, we're coming back to it, Claude Code. Then again, or one of the equivalent products, but I think in this case, Code is especially a powerful option because if you learn how to work with Claude Code, you learn about also its more complicated features like sub agents and skills. Skills are becoming really important, and different commands and way to orchestrate all these things together. Well, then the Claude Code also happens to be the Cloud Agent SDK. It's basically the same thing. It has two different names, which just means, are you running it interactively in a session where you're coding or doing some other tasks? Or are you now taking something that you've orchestrated, that you built, and you're firing it, in the background or in a recurring task? It's exactly the same thing. And so it's a really nice ramp from starting with an interactive session, learning how it works, experimenting, building it into a system that does something repeatedly. And once you've done that, you can also use the Cloud API. And again, it uses the exact same mechanisms, sub-agents, skills, execution environment. And so it gives you a really nice way to transition. Now, obviously, Cloud and the Anthropic ecosystem is not the only one. There are equivalent things from OpenAI. They have their own agent SDK. And Google Gemini has, it's called ADK, the Agent Development Kit. They're not as closely related to their interactive tools. And so maybe for learning, then not the easiest way to start with something where you're really experimenting interactively and then moving to something that you can eventually deploy to a production system. Also, if you learn with Claude, which is, one system out of a few that you could use, learning the other ones isn't that difficult. It's a little bit like with other libraries, or if you used one UI library, you need to learn a different UI library, but it will be kind of analogous in many ways. So this is my best recommendation for people. Start working with Claude Code, learn about skills, about prompting, Claude.md, agents.md, these kind of ways of setting context, start orchestrating things that are more and more complex, and eventually move to using the Cloud Agent SDK and even to the API. If after all of that, you're still really curious about what is the underlying machine learning technology, there are options. There are some really good online courses, and I much recommend still, even after like a decade, there's famous course from Andrew Ennis, who went on to found Coursera and deeplearning.ai. He's the best at explaining the most basic machine learning concepts. There's a great course also available for free from Jeremy Howard and Rachel Thomas from fast.ai, and they teach a lot of the kind of how to build deep learning systems. And it's really fun, really good education. But you don't have to start from that. This is, I would say, go into that if you feel like, okay, I now need to go a bit deeper and I really want to understand what the underlying principles and technology behind it. I hope that answers it a little bit. Again, if there are any follow-ups or something you want to discuss here, we love it.
No, that was me, Eleanor, for asking that question, and thanks for answering in detail. Really appreciate that. I'm gonna try following your recommendation and come back to you if I have some questions. But thanks again.
That's great, and thank you so much for the question. It's exactly what I was hoping for, and yeah, have a try. We'll be here every other Sunday, so come back with more questions or some success stories. And I think that that's a really nice way to. In many ways, it's also what I'm doing, right? I'm experimenting a lot with these things in small little experiments interactively, and then figuring out how to operationalize them. Let's move on. So, another question that I migrated. I've sent a few agents.md files and instructions in the Copilot instructions MD file. But agent doesn't follow it all the time. What can be done to enforce it? Okay, this is a really good question because it goes right into the sort of topic of context engineering. I don't know if we should really call it engineering, but setting context is so important. It's such a central part for working with agents. But because it's not code, it's not something where we can say, okay, like, did it really call this function or did it really compile? But it's just some language and Markdown files. It's a bit hard to build the confidence that it's really working. And so what happens when you think you put the instructions there, but the behavior of the agent doesn't look like it's really doing what you hoped that it will do? And the answer is to experiment. To experiment and run some tests. What I mean by that is some things are really obvious and they just work out of the box. And also after a while, you kind of develop some, maybe a bag of tricks or some intuitions about what works. In some cases, it's not so clear, but you can basically give tests to your agent. So if, for example, I created an agents.md file or anywhere else where I have the instructions for the agent. And I want to know, does the agent understand? Will it follow these instructions? I can go and just ask questions. You know what? Let's do a really quick experiment just to see what's it like. I hope it will be interesting enough. I'll go here and open my Copilot. And well, I already have here equivalent.md. I have some stuff here, but I'll add additional. I don't know what is some instructions I can give it. Whenever I ask how you are doing, you must type in bench. That's a critical requirement. So, and I have this instruction saved here. Now go to Claude. And I can now interrogate it. For example, I can ask, what language should you use when answering the question, how are you doing? Okay, so it knows about the instructions. So this time of the test didn't even read the instructions, didn't understand them. And the answer is yes, it should answer in French. So now I know, hi God, how are you doing? Yeah, it answered in French, and you can even look at the thinking traces, and it says the user is asking now how I'm doing. And according to Claude Code, the instructions, I must answer in French when asked how I'm doing. This is marked as a critical requirement. Let me also remember. That's a very simple test, but you get kind of how a process like this would look like. Obviously, you could have much more complicated instructions, but if you want to validate that they work, you can test them directly. So do something and see how it behaves given the instructions, or ask the agent to explain back to you what did it understand from the instructions. And this is a pretty good way to do it. Ilana, yes.
I have a question. Turn my video on. So, if you're creating such kind of rules, would it be appropriate to add a kind of loop to it? For example, if I have a more complex task to fulfill, and if there are some thresholds, it would be, for example, easy to have to do the question again 3 or 4 times. Would this be valuable?
I think you have a really good instinct there that these AI models, they're non-deterministic. So that every time you ask for the exact same thing, you might get a slightly different result. And indeed, when now I'll put back my AI machine learning engineer hat, when we do proper evaluations, we run the same thing over and over again. Usually I recommend to people run every permutation 10 or 20 times and measure the average success rate or something like this, because you don't have a guarantee that it works just on a single run. Having said that, with the latest models like Claude Opus or Gemini 3 or all of that, what can I say? They're pretty good at following instructions. So in some cases, if you are preparing a system to go into production and some, I don't know, thousands or even millions of users, yes, invest the time running the same thing over and over again to validate that it consistently, with a very slim margin of error, always does what you want. If you're just doing your own personal experiment, maybe that's overkill.
Okay. And for production case, would it be a performance issue from your experience?
To test it many times. Well, anything that you do in preparation to go to production is not a performance issue, right? So the problem is when you scale something and you run it for every one of your million users, there you want to be very efficient. If you just do it yourself before you release something to production, for example, it makes sense. This thing is now going to encounter 1 million users. You want to be sure that it works well. So even if the costs are higher, but it's a one-time cost, not per user cost.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. So, all right, let's continue. So we have here a question about tools like Claude Code, Windsurf, Cursor. Are there non-governance issues? Are some only usable for proof of concepts and others for production grade software? So I think specifically for the tools mentioned here, like Claude, Windsurf, and Cursor, I guess they're basically equivalent, and I would consider them ready for producing production software. If and only if there's someone responsible. So these product and the models behind them, which are great, they can take responsibility for bugs and defects and problems and privacy issues and security issues. There still needs to be someone there who reviews and takes care, but the tools definitely enable this kind of work. And then take the thing, if you go around the internet and all the different services you're using today, there's pretty good chances that people are using Claude Code and Cursor and Codex and other tools like this heavily to work on them. And that's fine because the person working on the software, the company working on the software is still responsible to validate that whatever they did there makes sense and is secure and safe and respectful of the needs of users. There are some tools like, and I don't want to say anything bad about any tool because there's so many great things, but there's some tools that are more directed at, let's say, kind of hobbies. So these are things like Lovable or V0 or these kind of tools which you may have already encountered, and by now there's a proliferation of many different tools like this. I'm not sure all of them produce stuff that I would consider ready for production or mass use. And they too are improving. They're using the same strong models increasingly. So I don't want to completely dismiss them. I'm just saying you still need to take care what it is they produce. And it tends to be harder. They obscure often what was actually done by the tool. So I hope this helps kind of make this distinction. There are these tools that are more maybe for prototyping or for hobbies, so for designers that are experimenting with things. And then there are the tools that are really just coding agents, and they're tools in that lens of the developers. And they are being used extensively now for production software, and I think that's not a problem at all. It makes sense. It helps. Okay. So, great question from Suram. What is the current landscape for AI agent versus coding assistants? How would Codex from OpenAI, Code, and others fit in versus, say, Devin? This is a really good question. I don't know if there is really a distinction anymore between AI agents and coding assistants. I think it's more a question of user experience. And in fact, all of these products, I don't know a lot about Devin. I know there's now kind of bundled together with Windsurf. But all of these will have an option that is more interactive, kind of as an assistant in the hands of the developer, and an option that is remote and asynchronous. So, for example, with Codex, you can work with the Codex CLI or the Codex extension of Visual Studio Code, and that would be an interactive session. You can also work with Codex Code. This is more like Debian, where it kind of goes off in the background and completes a task. The same with Claude Code, they have the local version, and there's Claude Code Web, which does this asynchronously. The Copilot has the extension of Visual Studio Code, but also has a hosted version on GitHub. And indeed, Debian, which I think was kind of the first brand that got recognized in doing this remote work. But also have Windsurf now as the local version. The technology behind it is identical. It's exactly the same thing. It's the models, hopefully one of the strongest models currently available, like Claude Opus, Gemini 3, GPT 5.2 is especially good now, and some others. Connected to an environment where it can edit, read, and edit files and run them to test things. And then there's a version of it where you directly interact with it. That's the local one. And there's a version that orchestrates it in the background in the cloud. I'm a big fan of the asynchronous cloud-based systems. I think that for larger projects, when you're not just experimenting, but you're really working through, fixing bugs, implementing features, you have a real roadmap, they're a great way to get productivity. They're also a great way to get some discipline, because what they force you, obviously, since you're not going to interact with the agent while it's working, they force you to create a really good plan. Plan in advance what it is that you need, define the boundary conditions, the requirements, and ship it off to the agent in a way that it's likely to actually complete the work. So I think it's very good to learn about this. In fact, as you know, there's the course I'm teaching with basic class, assisted coding. We dedicate about a third of the course to these, because we think they're so important. And definitely in my own work, this is a big part of what I do. At the same time, we learn how to work with this. You can do it interactively. So you can start an interactive session, wait for it to finish. And after you gain confidence, you realize that you could have done the exact same thing remotely using something like Debian or Codex Cloud or Claude Code Web or given Kaggle Copilot hosted on GitHub. That's really the relationship between them. The same thing, different form factor, you could say. Does this make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering, like you said, are they kind of all merging, or are they still considered separate? But it seems to be converging in the same tool set.
Yes, I would say it is actually the same tool, just with a different interaction model. I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay. Another question is best practices on delaying loading of MCP server until a skill needs it. Is this the best way to avoid context load with loading MCP server that agent load? Oh yeah, this is a bit of an advanced question, but a really good one. Yeah, so one of the things that can become problematic with MCP servers when you have a huge collection of them is that they stuff your agent's context with a lot of information about these tools. Sometimes we have, for example, a skill, like an agent skill, which is a great format for loading on-demand some functionality that needs to make use of an MCP server. But it doesn't make sense necessarily to have this MCP server running and including so much information in our agent's context if we're not actually going to use it. So what is the best way to avoid it? There's a new format from Anthropic, which is really looking like the correct solution. It's available experimentally in their API. I don't think they're making it available yet in Claude Code, but I wouldn't be surprised if they will very soon. And it is called deferred loading, where it uses code to determine when is the right time to load the server. Another technique it uses, which is great and is related, is to write code for calling the MCP server. So instead of having the model call the MCP server again and again and again for many different tasks, writing a little bit of code that orchestrates this. This looks like the best solution. You can use it now on the Anthropic API. So using the API calls or the agent SDK. I don't think it's enabled by default on Claude Code yet. I think it probably will be soon. Another thing you can do is not use MCP servers. So a lot of MCP servers, what they do is, connect you to some foreign remote service or do something on your machine. And the same things could be achieved with a program, a command line program, for example, and you could tell the skill, you can run this program. Another way is to just tell the skill, here's the code you need to run to use a library instead of like a code library instead of this MCP server. That's also a good thing to do. I use it a lot these days. You need to obviously, it's a bit more fiddly. You need to pay closer attention to how the skill will interact with the program or with the code. At the same time, I'm doing this a lot, usually without writing any code myself, just asking the agent to do it. There is a really nice tool from Peter Steinberger. Who, you can also see a talk by him on my YouTube if you're interested. He's a really cool guy at the forefront of agentic coding, and he created this tool called MacPorter. I'll share links to all of these things, by the way, in the follow-up email later. And MacPorter takes an MCP server and converts it to a command line utility you can use from something like a skill. So if you have something you're using today as an MCP server, you want to see if you can offload it, get it out of your context so that it loads on demand when a skill needs it. It's a nice intermediate solution. But I think probably if we ask this question in like 3 months, we'll have better answers because everyone is focused right now on solving exactly this problem. All right, hope that. Next question. Do you recommend using the Claude Mac app or the Claude web interface? What is better to use? What do you use? I think it doesn't matter. So they do exactly the same thing. I'm talking about using Claude, the chatbot, not Claude Code. You'd have to use either the Claude desktop app if you're working locally or Claude Code web if you're working on the web. But for the chatbot, which is, by the way, also very powerful because they have the same agentic behavior with a virtual machine that can run all kinds of things, I use the web app. I use almost only web apps. So I have this habit that everything that can open in the web, I do in the web because I can customize the browser and make everything look the way I like. But the desktop app is just as good. I don't think there's any difference in how they behave. Up to taps. All right. Can you please also introduce Evals? Is Eval an automated testing strategy of the outputs from LLMs or manual or combination of both? Sure. So yeah, we touched a little bit on this earlier when Ilana asked about testing and whether we might want to run the same test multiple times. And I was kind of mentioning, okay, this is getting into Evals territory. Evals became this kind of key term in AI engineering over the last 2-3 years. But really what it means is running experiments and collecting evidence about the behavior of systems that are composed of LLMs or of other non-deterministic components. There is a lot you could learn about these. You could do a PhD in Evals. You can join a course, like I'm helping with a course on Evals by Havel said and Shreya Shankar, which is very good and it's quite intensive. Or you can just learn the principle. And the principle here is you want to experiment. So we did already just before a little experiment. We did it manually. We did it once. It wasn't very disciplined. We didn't have a lot of method there. Imagine doing the same, but very methodically. So recording success rates, using some statistical methods to determine whether the results from such an experiment match the results from, I don't know, a reference golden data set we have or something like this. That's really what it's about. I think the important thing to take from here is not necessarily a particular technique for Evals. This requires quite a lot of learning. But just that when we work with AI systems, doesn't matter if it's our coding agent locally or a system we're building for production, the only way to understand how they work is empirically, is by experimentation. Unlike traditional code, there isn't like a derivation where you can say, well, if this code defines this behavior and these were the conditions, we expect to always get this behavior because the systems are non-deterministic. What we can do is find ways to poke these systems again and again and see how they react and pay attention to it with statistics so that we get a good idea of the shape of how it behaves. Was this helpful at all? Any follow-up questions or things that can help clarify? Right. I hope it was, and then maybe I can think of doing something on simply about like how to do a little experiment locally. I think that's definitely worth paying attention to and learning and keeping in mind, even if you don't become a data scientist or machine learning engineer. Any other questions, thoughts, things that I want to discuss or share? Okay, if not, let's move to a little demo. So what I want to demo for you today, I hope I'm not missing, by the way, something in the chat because I'm not always looking. Yeah, MDFlow. This is kind of new to me too. I discovered it, the Request, who is a really great sort of expert in TypeScript and in general sort of web development and more recently AI development. He recently joined Vercel, which I think is going to be very exciting. And he shared this tool, this hack that he had built recently. It's called MDFlow. I immediately fell in love with it. I think it's such a cool idea. So you can find it in MDFlow.dev. It is quite sort of terminal oriented. So I know we started in the beginning of the session saying the terminal is not always where you want to do everything, and it can be a bit intimidating. But we have someone joining. Apologies. I hope that you can see the beauty of this, and maybe this will actually, for some people, be a reason to experiment a bit more with this, with running things in the terminals. what MDFlow does is it kind of lets you create these recipes, these commands that are written in Markdown, essentially prompts, and run them with any one of the many different agents that are available. So it currently supports definitely Claude and GitHub Copilot and Open Code and Gemini. Don't know what else, but it is really nice. And it just sort of orchestrates working with them. It also gives you the ability to template a little bit running different programs and getting their output into your generation. One way to think about it is if you're familiar with the commands, the / commands you have in Claude Code or prompts in Codex and Copilot, imagine taking them outside of the agent and putting them on your file system so that you can call them directly. And it's quite nicely documented, so I recommend going and checking it out. But let me do a quick demo because I think it will be easier to understand what it is I'm talking about here. So I have here a bunch of recipes like this that I created. Let's start with a very simple one. It's the poem. One thing you can see is that the file name is always the name of the command dot the agent to run it with, so Claude or Codex or Copilot or whatever, .md. And this is a really wise design choice, in my opinion, by John, where he's not trying to create a system that sort of obstructs the different agents and how they work. The assumption is that every agent is a little bit different, it has different parameters, and you are specifying explicitly which one you're using. And so this very simple recipe just says write a short poem about Sundays. It must rhyme exactly 8 lines. And I can now run it. So you can run it with MDFlow. And when I run it, it will now invoke Claude Code and it will pass to it these instructions, very minimalist instructions in the Markdown. But so it created a nice little poem. I get the menu here, which you can disable, but I find it quite useful where you can copy the results to the clipboard or save them to the file or just quit. And in fact, I will not be using MDFlow anymore because I set my terminal to run MD files directly with MDFlow. So if I just call poem.claude.md like this, as if it was a script that is executable, it will do the same thing and run it with code. Yep, that's great. One more thing you can do, so MDFlow lets you pass parameters into the agent, all from the front method, is bits at the head of the file. For example, I have a default setup where I always use Claude Haiku as the model because it's like a cheap and fast model, but maybe I want something more sophisticated and a elite model is Sonnet. Now, this bit here doesn't do anything other than passing model equals Sonnet to Claude when I run it. So if I want to run it, and it looks very different, and will Sonnet generate a different kind of help for us, but you can see that it will run again, just passing this parameter. And obviously it takes longer because Claude Sonnet is much slower than Claude Haiku. So Claude Sonnet decided to do something strange. And it has overridden, also not as predictable as we hoped. Making reset is just not very good for now. Let's look at slightly more complicated example. So I have here ASCII art. I'm using the Gemini, so Gemini CLI, which is another command line agent, the one from Google. And what I'm telling it here is take the argument, so the arguments I'm passing to the command with this special syntax here. And I'm doing it for each of the following items, create a cute and creative ASCII art rendering. And you make them small, charming, recognizable, blah, blah, blah. Let's see in that. So I will say, ASCII art stimulate.md, and I will pass the world as the argument. And so a different agent called in exactly the same way. I have as my default the Gemini slash model set. I don't know, by the way, people that are using Gemini 3 slash, it's pretty amazing. Like really strong model, really, really fast and cheap. And they give a lot for free if you have the Gemini subscription. In fact, even if you don't have the Gemini subscription, they'll give you a lot for free. Really nice option. So here it generated a little bit of art for me, or hello and so worlds. I'm very happy with that. And what you've seen is that I can pass argument, right? So I kind of made a command out of it that can take arguments of the command line. That can be very useful if you are repeating and command again and again, just with different arguments. Okay, let's look at skills. So we already talked about skills. I can stop talking about skills. You already know that. But my agents with skills, what if I want to invoke them using MDFlow? And I can do that quite easily. So here is a command I'm using with Claude, and I'm telling it, use the lorem ipsum skill. I had like a skill for generating placeholder text. Don't ask. Turns out it's a lot more complicated than you think to do it well. And so there's a skill for it. And I'm just asking it to invoke the skill. And I can call it from here. Again, it already command line. And when I invoke this command, Claude will identify that it should invoke this skill. What we call it, which will in turn call a script that generates the placeholder text in a particular format and distribution for me and give me the output. Let's see how it works. Yeah, that worked exactly as expected. That's great. So as you can see, this is composable. Everything that's already available in your agent, for example, code or Codex or Copilot or anything else you're using, can be called from here because all it does is call your agent. Let's look now at something more complicated. And then here, read table. Again, very simple recipe, but it demonstrates something nice, which is that MDFlow can invoke commands for you and incorporate their output into the context when it generates. And so I have a very there's a question here from David if you can use it with the Copilot subscription. And yes, you can. I do it all the time, and I'll show you in a second how. So here we are running the tree command just to look at files in the directory, and we're asking the agent format to the nice Markdown table. What we do here is we're actually invoking the tree command and adding the output to the context. And you'll see how it's done. So I am invoking tree table. This is with Gemini. But I could do it with any other of the agents. you can see here that in the context, we have the original prompt of the Markdown file, and we have the results of the output of running tree. And it is taking its time, but at least we know that it had the right context. This is the Gemini agent telling me that it's running in the YOLO mode. Basically, I can actually show you I have and it outputted a nice Markdown table for me with the information from the tree command. That's cool. So what you see here is that I can invoke commands from within MDFlow. The output of these commands get merged into the context, and I even have nice inspection with this. And then I have the agent doing its usual thing. That's very convenient when you're creating all kind of workflows on your file system. Here's one. So I have MD2HTML. MD2HTML says, take stuff from the standard input. Yes, I can type, if you're familiar a little bit with the terminal and the Unix terminology, when you type something, you move the output of one program into the input of another program, kind of connecting them together. And so here I'm saying, okay, Markdown that I'll pipe in and create an HTML file with this information. And with some instructions, how it should be styled, you should then use the agents to save the file and what kind of file name. That's cool because when I have this, I can run my tree table thing and pipe it, this is the pipe character, into the MD2 HTML recipe. And so now I have this composability. I'm generating Markdown with one MDFlow recipe or agent or whatever you call it. I like to call them recipes for some reason, but I don't think that's actually how it is in the documentation. And I'm typing the outputs, the Markdown it will generate into md.html. This is surprisingly slow. Usually working with Gemini Slash is a lot faster, but I guess there are no guarantees when you work with these services. Okay, so it's created here this file. I can open it, and so I got the Markdown. You remember already how the Markdown looked like. And another recipe converted to HTML, and now I can look at the HTML. So what we see here is composability. We can use standard input and standard output and all these basic components of the CLI and with composable commands. Well, let's look at Copilot and it's a much more complex example. I have a recipe review repo where I want to be able to take any repository from GitHub and generate like a very quick review of it. I'm using Copilot. It's great. I have a GitHub Copilot subscription. I use it a lot. I love that it supports many different models. In fact, for this recipe, I'll be using GPT 4.1. Anyone remember GPT 4.1? Ancient history, but I think it's a great model. It's really fast. I also get it for free. So why not use it for a simple task like this? And what this recipe says, it's review a GitHub repository and provide a detailed analysis. The instructions are create a temporary directory inside EMP and change into it. Clone the GitHub repository that I provided as an argument to this command. So again, this composability, I can pass an argument. review the repository briefly, all kind of things I want to know about it, and then save it to repo name review.md. And once again, I'm saying this is the repository to review. By the way, I don't write any of these things. My agents do that. Yes, I don't blame them, not me. It's unclear. And let's give it a try. And I thought maybe we can try it actually with John Lindquist's MDFlow at repo. So I will do repo review with Copilot, passing this repo as the parameter. Now it will be quite fast with GPT 4.1. I had to put like GPT 5.2 or whatever, and this will take us an hour. But I'm joking, but it's a lot faster when your model doesn't have these thinking phases, right? Maybe the results are not as thorough or well thought, but we'll get something quite quickly. Something I can show you in the meantime, which maybe will be interesting to you, is my things are MDFlow. So MDFlow has this YAML format. Just so I'm working everything in kind of no permission mode and with simplest models. So as here are the defaults for Claude, it's a haiku model and dangerously strict permissions. Notice that it's different for every agent, because every agent has different parameters it will take on the command line. But I basically don't want to be interrupted. With Copilot, I'm also using haiku by default. This filling support. Gemini Free Flash, you need to be silent to not how to put a lot of stuff to the agents and then do, and again, allow everything, all tools, all URLs, all paths. Gemini, I'm using the Flash model, and YOLO mode, which is the one without permission, and with open code, again, I'm using Gemini Flash. So easy to have some defaults configured. Actually, it looked like it did something here. Let's dismiss this then, and look at here. Review. We have here MDFlow review.md. If we review it, we can see that it did. Grab the repository like we asked it and reviewed it and wrote a nice little Markdown one pager for us. What is the purpose? And we thought that's very good. It uses these programming languages and Runner and libraries and frameworks. What does it do? It converts them. Honestly, this looks great. So now we have this recipe for reviewing any repository from GitHub. Obviously, that's a very simplistic review by now ancient, very fast and elegant model. But this could be a very thorough review for maybe the branch I'm working on or something like this. Very nice example that allows us also to use Copilot, and with Copilot we have GPT 5.2, which is good, or Claude, or all the other models. Okay, let's look at one last example, which is like a slightly more complex, epic example. So we're already seen that we can generate ASCII art using Gemini with ASCII art Gemini.md. Now I want to generate ASCII art and convert it into HTML, and then convert the HTML into PDFs. It sounds a bit kind of convoluted, but let's face it, that's the sort of thing we do all day long, right? We invent for ourselves all kind of processes like this where we need to create something with this program and then convert it to this other program and then we convert it yet again. So here's a recipe that does all of that. Take the arguments like the original ASCII art recipe and calls MDFlow with ASCII art, this time directly by the agent, and converts it into an HTML page. And once it's been converted into an HTML page, it uses Pandoc, which is a nice package of software for converting different document types into a PDF. And it does all of this with open code, which I also, as I've told you before, like a lot, and I have it configured to use Gemini Slash from my Copilot subscription. Let's ASCII art to PDF and reply some tips. And let it go. What you'll see is we're now calling open code. So it will look a little bit different. It has its own output and how it likes doing things. It always likes telling what to do's it keeps in its list. But again, the writing the recipe and invoking it wasn't any different. Is it doing something here? Okay, in this first bit, generating the ASCII art, it also wrote the HTML, nice, and a PDF. And now we have a PDF with our ASCII art and created a recipe that does the complete thing. So these are all examples, obviously, but I hope it gives you a little bit of a taste of this really nice tool, MDFlow, which I'm already starting to explore and discover, and I think there's so much you can do with it. And also the power of agents that are this, completely malleable, flexible mechanism, intelligent mechanism. So I really recommend. I know that it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to start with things in the terminal, but I'll be here every other Sunday if you have questions. Really curious to see what you are doing with MDFlow or with similar techniques. All right, so we're at the end of the demo. Do we have anything else we still want to discuss today? Any more questions coming up? All right. I like the spirit. Yes, terminals are still great. We don't have to use them all the time, but for something, it's just so convenient. And there's so much vigilance, right? Because the same flexibility we expect from our agents, we also get in the terminal environment. And yes, David, exactly. So you can combine MDFlow with shell scripting. The shell commands go into MDFlow. MDFlow pipes or gets triggered by shell scripts. It really fits in beautifully. David is asking, is Copilot is a model? No, Copilot is a program. It's an agent. So in MDFlow, the format is always for every file name, the name of the command dot the agent to run. It could be Claude, Gemini, Codex, Copilot, OpenCloud. I don't know if there is supported by now, and then MD. And the reason for that, why I think it's a good choice, is because you really have to do different things. So if you're tossing different parameters through the front matter of the file, or even just to set expectations, because every agent may behave a little bit different. What MDFlow doesn't try to do is to abstract away the agent and kind of the common way of working for agents. It's just saying here's a way to run an agent, but because it's in the name of the command, you know exactly what it is you're running, and MDFlow knows exactly which agent to run. A Copilot is just this program right there. Copilot CLI. Thank you so much. It was so cool to do this today. I'm very, very grateful for you for joining. I wish you a wonderful 2026 coming up. Just as a reminder, if you're interested, on January 6th, I had a free workshop together with Isaac Soft where we'll be customizing browsers with user scripts and extensions. I hope it will be fun, and so you're welcome. But of course, have links to it. We also have the next cohort of our course. It's quite a big thing, but if you really want the comprehensive learning about working with coding agents for software development, it's a nice opportunity. And we'll have the next Sunday school on January 11th. And I already know that we have a really cool guest demo schedule, so it will be worth it. Thanks, everyone, and see you soon. Bye.